Okay, everyone, thank you so much. We have over 160 people, and people still are coming. So, sorry for waiting for a couple of minutes. Thank you so much again for everyone. Hope you have a great summer break. I'm Karman Hassan. I'm a research scholar and also teach environmental law courses at the University of Houston Law Center. And as a part of Environmental Energy and Natural Resource Center, we have a webinar series, and every month we invite in one of the scholars in the area to talk and address one of the critical issues related to environmental law, energy law, or climate change or natural resource law. So I'm glad here that we have Professor Tracy Hester as well as one of the co-directors. On behalf of all the inner center, we are glad to introduce our speaker, Professor Alexandra Klass. She's a James Degnan Professor of Law at the Michigan Law, where she brings wealth of not just theoretical but real-world experience. And she's teaching the courses in environmental law, energy law, and natural resource. And not just these, but also she's also um, taught and also property law. So her academic career is marked by prestigious visiting teaching, including Harvard University, Stanford, and Uppsala in Sweden, alongside as a recognition for teaching of the year during her tenure at the University of Minnesota Law School. Beyond her academic or teaching, she also authored and co-authored several prestigious books, including the most recent one, which is a like foundation books, a textbook that we use in for environmental or energy law, and the most recent one is Energy Law and Policy that just received an order, and I'm glad to read it. And these one of the books that she shared with other colleagues, great knowledge with us in terms of in energy law and policy. So what truly distinguished Professor Klass, apart her deep commitment, a part of academy is a deep commitment to public service and practical legal practice. So before entering academy, she was a part of she was a partner for Dorsey Whitney LLP, and where she's worked on litigation related to environmental law and land use. Her expertise has frequently been thought out at the highest level in the government, as she served on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's advisory council on climate change and spent over a year during the Biden-Harris administration as a Deputy General Counsel for Energy Efficiency Climate Energy Demonstration at the U.S. Department of Energy. So in today's webinar, which is a very interesting topic and controversial one, so how we meet the challenge that we had from electricity sector. As you know, that for most of the decade that we believe that the US power grid has operated on a simple promise that electricity will always be there, like when we flip a switch. But today we have it in a different situation with a massive spike in energy demand from AI data centers, crypto mining, and other demands for energy. So how we meeting this demand in the very challenging time, and how we benefiting from another areas of law that she and with the professor Owen concluded in this very fascinating paper that would be a talk for today. So for the one who have any question, please just usual type your questions on a Q&A box. At the end, we have like 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A discussion, and I will make sure to share the CLE credit at the end of the talk. So, Professor Klass, thank you so much again for your generosity, for your time, and sharing your insights with us. And the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here, and it's always great to have a Texas audience when you are talking about anything related to electricity. I know everything is bigger in Texas generally, but certainly when it comes to electricity, whether it's electricity demand, whether it's responding to that demand, always talking about electricity issues in Texas is enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A. At the end, maybe get a Texas perspective from folks in the audience. So, over the next, remainder of this hour, I'm going to present this paper called Allocating Electricity that I wrote with Dave Owen, who's a professor at UC Law, San Francisco. We published it in February in the George Washington Law Review, and we started working on it maybe a little bit over a year ago. I want to say like maybe in like December, January 2025. There was already a lot of talk about electricity demand, a lot of talk about data centers, and the question of sort of what do we do about it? And I wanted to write something on sort of how electricity regulation would respond to this. And I wanted to look at things that were outside of the electricity sector. And I thought about Dave as a co-author primarily because he's one of the premier water law experts in the country, and he knows a lot about energy and electricity as well. And I thought water law and how we deal with resources that are scarce. We've really never talked about electricity as being scarce in this country for a long time, but there are lots of resources that have been scarce historically. One is natural gas in the 1970s and 1980s. I thought that might be a good analog. But the other one that I was really thinking about was water. And so I wanted to co-author this paper with someone who really deeply knew the water law systems, particularly in the Western United States. So there's a link in the slide. It says available on SSRN. You can click on the link and you can read the entire paper if you're interested, or you can just listen right now and I can summarize it for you. So just an overview of basically what we talk about in the paper and what I'll talk about today. We're going to talk about the challenge that we're trying to address, which is increasing electricity demand from data centers and other large loads. Also be talking about the conventional approaches, sort of what we've done in the past and why it might not work now. And so this is when we switch to approaches from other resources that have been scarce in the past. And then we come up based on those approaches with a proposal that we set out in the paper and that I'll talk about today, and some of the caveats and concerns associated with that. So first, let's talk about the challenges that we face. And I'm going to go pretty quickly through a series of slides to sort of show this visually. So as you can see, from like 1970 until fairly recently, electricity demand in the US was pretty flat. We had, some small increases, very gradual, and then all of a sudden projections start to increase dramatically, maybe. And this is really all starting in kind of really 2024 into 2025. It's like, whoa, I think we're going to move from 15 years of flat electricity demand to something different. And the next couple slides will be familiar to some of you, but maybe not to those of you who don't think about electricity issues all the time. I'm just showing where we have our regional transmission organizations that run regional wholesale power markets. They also do the transmission planning in the areas where they exist. And you'll see, for Texas, you've got ERCOT, which is most of Texas, but then you have little pieces of Texas that are also part of the Southwest Power Pool and also part of MISO, where I am. I split my time between Michigan, where I teach, and then Minnesota, where I lived for 30 years. So both of my upper Midwest M states in which I live are part of MISO. You see some other RTOs in other parts of the country. You also see a lot of white space. So not all utilities, not electric utilities, not all states are part of RTOs, but a good chunk of the country is, and this will become relevant to some of the other slides. And then we also have what are called regional entities that are keeping track of the reliability of the grid and the reliability of power. And these cover the entire United States. And some of these overlap with the RTOs that I showed you on the last slide, but you also see large areas that are not covered by RTOs, but they still have these regional entities that look at that keep that make sure that the lights stay on and the grid is working. You see that extends up into Canada as well. Okay, so I showed you those two maps in the different colors so you can see that the projected load increase, the projected increase in electricity demand is not the same all over the country. And a lot of these are divided up by either those RTOs or those NERC regions, and you'll see that kind of in the legend to the side. And so you see, in some areas, electricity demand is expected to be increase quite dramatically. In other areas, not so much. So this is definitely a regional story that we're telling here. And then this shows it as well. So you see in the ERCOT region of Texas, these are all projections, of course. We don't have the actuals yet. But starting in 2025, projections for very significant electricity demand from 2025 to 2026, and then presumably moving on from that. Also increased demand in the PJM interconnection, and the map to the right on the screen again reminds you where those regions are, and then compares that to the historical average, which of course is quite a bit lower. What's driving this load growth? All you have to do is open the newspaper to read about data centers throughout the country, and a lot of this is data centers. But I put this slide up to show it's not all data centers. We have had an increase in industrial activity and manufacturing in the United States the last few years, and that is expected to increase. One of the reasons that electricity demand has stayed flat for the last 15 years has really been a combination of moving away from an industrial and manufacturing economy in the US, as well as energy efficiency for appliances and lighting. That is really what has kept electricity demand low. But we have an increase in manufacturing. We have an increase in oil and gas operations. Obviously, that is significantly higher in Texas than in other parts of the country. But you see that data centers are a big part of this story. But I do want to stress it's not the whole story. And of course, we also have increased electrification of transportation through EVs and electrification of buildings. So that's a percentage as well. And where that load growth is coming from also differs by region. So if you look at CAISO out in California, you see some load growth, not as much as in other areas, and that's primarily associated with transportation electrification. You have a lot of EVs there, and there's also building electrification going on at a much more rapid rate in California than in other areas of the country. In ERCOT in Texas, it's everything. You've got significant demand for data centers. You also have industrial development. You also have oil and gas development. In SPP, in the yellow, it's kind of a mix. There's oil and gas producing regions there. There's also data center growth there because there's room on the grid for data centers. MISO in that region, you're also seeing a lot of manufacturing growth, so that is a driver as well as data centers. PJM here in the east, you've probably heard about the data center demand in Northern Virginia. There's also activity in other parts of Virginia, in Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So there, the load growth really is driven primarily by data centers, and it's quite significant. And then there's some other areas shown here. So you see the regional story that the data is telling us and that the projections are showing. Here's just another map that the National Renewable Energy Lab put together back in November that gives you a sense of, again, this is just focusing on data centers, where data center infrastructure is operating, is under construction, or is planned. You see Texas as a real hub, not surprisingly, but then you also see this area of Virginia that's a big hub, lots in this kind of former industrial Rust Belt area, some pockets here in the West, but really not as much as what you're seeing in the Midwest, in the East, and of course in Texas. This is just an example that we had in the paper. This is one of the electric utilities in Michigan. It's called, yeah, Indiana and Michigan Power is the name of it. It's kind of on the border between Indiana and Michigan. And you'll see kind of what their current electricity mix is, sort of the types of customers that they provide electricity to on the left. That was showing the current. You got residential, you've got a mix of a whole lot of different things. And then the projections that, data centers could actually make up about over 50% of the electricity demand just in that one utility. And so this is just as an example, because there's lots of utilities that are looking at this, and electric utilities then need to respond. How are we going to meet this demand from this new customer base? And this just provides a historical perspective of what we're seeing. It's not like we haven't seen rapid electricity demand in the past. Think about the 1950s, everybody getting refrigerators and electrical appliances, air conditioning in the 1960s. So we saw pretty significant load growth in those areas. And then you see much more modest load growth in the 70s, in the 80s. The 2000s, 2010s, I mentioned lighting before. This is where we're moving away from incandescent bulbs, moving to LEDs, and you see almost no load growth at all. And then just over a 5-year period now, expected from 2025 to 2030, that data centers are gonna make up a very large percentage of load growth. So you're seeing that as kind of on par with what we saw in the 50s and the 60s. And of course, what did we do in the 50s and the 60s? We just built a lot of new electricity infrastructure, right? You built a lot of new power plants, you built a lot of new transmission lines, and as a country, we were able to do that fairly rapidly. Well, we're not able to do that as much throughout the country. I would say Texas probably does it better than any other state. But if you just look at the miles of high capacity transmission lines that have been added annually, it has been decreasing for a long time. And we haven't been building the new high voltage transmission lines that we spent a lot of the 50s and 60s and 70s building. So that's a problem. We also have a problem building electricity generation. There's long wait times, lots of supply chain problems with regard to whether we want to build new natural gas fired turbines. We also have the current Trump administration basically waging war on some of our lowest cost forms of electricity generation, wind and solar. So we have the current administration making it difficult to build new things. And then we have local opposition. We have local opposition not only to data centers, which we're reading lots about, but also to renewable energy projects. I would say particularly outside of Texas, where it's always been more difficult to build new projects. So that's making it really, really hard to respond in a way that we might have responded to in the past when we had increases in electricity demand. Our ability to move quickly and to meet that demand is less than it used to be. There's also caution in place. We've got all of these predictions for increased electricity demand, but we're not really good at predicting these things. So back in 2007, the energy modelers at the Energy Information Administration, and their job is to make predictions about what's going to happen in the energy sector, they expected that we would have an increased electricity demand. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving here, but up here, that this is what would happen by 2023. They were off by a lot. This is during the years that electricity demand was essentially flat. So it's really hard to make these predictions. So that is a problem. Right now, we've got these predictions for significant increase in demand. I'm actually going to move back to the slide here. But if we ended up actually building the type of infrastructure that we needed to meet that demand, and then that demand doesn't show up, that's a lot of infrastructure that's got to be paid for by someone, usually utility ratepayers. So That's a problem. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, we also need to think about sort of what to build. And this is what we have been building in terms of energy generation, back since the 1990s. We've had really big shifts brought about in part by hydraulic fracturing in the early 2000s that has made natural gas much less expensive over those years. So we saw an increase in electric utilities investing in natural gas and people building natural gas plants because they could rely on it. A corresponding decrease in coal-fired power, which has become much less economic. And then, of course, as the cost of wind and solar has really decreased over the last 10 years, you see solar and wind on the upswing as well. Nuclear has been pretty flat. That may change, of course. We are currently in kind of a nuclear renaissance, at least in terms of public opinion, government support, both in the Biden administration and in the current Trump administration. But you're seeing sort of what we've been building in the US in terms of generation. Here's a snapshot in time today in 2025. You see natural gas is our biggest source of electricity generation. Renewables, all kinds of renewables up to 24%, nuclear around 17%, and coal 16%. But this is for the country as a whole. If we look at it state by state, there's significant variations in what is used to generate electricity on a state by state basis. So you see states like New Hampshire and Illinois where nuclear, that's shown in pink, is a very significant part of the energy mix. In a lot of states that have small populations and large amounts of wind, like Iowa, you see lots of wind energy as sort of a percentage here. Same with Kansas, same with South Dakota. Vermont is basically all hydropower and wind. So the blue is hydropower. And in Texas, you, of course, have a lot of everything. You got a lot of natural gas, you got a lot of wind, you have some nuclear, and this is not even showing, I guess green is other renewables, and a lot of that is solar these days as well. It doesn't break it out. So we have a lot of variation by state as well. And this just shows it over time. Once again, renewables on the increase and gas on the increase as well, at least since 2000. In terms of what we are actually building, the other slides we're looking at what we have in the electricity mix as a whole. This is looking at new additions, so new build. Saw a lot of gas in this area. During this period of time, you saw a lot of wind, and then starting around here, lots of solar as well. And then, of course, battery storage the last few years. And Texas has become, a real leader in both solar and in battery storage. So this is showing it a bit over time, just through 2000. So this is once again looking at, I'm going to sort of switch now to look at some of the climate implications of this. The fact that we now have a lot of increase in electricity demand, the question is, what are we going to build? We could build a lot of renewables. We could also keep coal plants open, which the current administration is trying to do, or we could build a lot of gas. And then there's talk about, of course, new nuclear as well. And there's a lot of uncertainty around this, particularly as political administrations change and as states put forward their preferences as well. But there's a lot of concerns about earlier efforts to try to get to net zero emissions. You had some goals, you had some targets, and then this is showing, well, what's in electric utilities integrated resource plans? What are their plans on what to build? And moving quite a bit away from either the targets or the net zero energy efforts that had been underway. Okay, so where does that leave us? Power demand could rise significantly. The projections seem to show that will happen, again, largely because of data centers, but our predictions are not always good, so that might not happen. And it's really hard to know and how to plan how to address that when we have this level of uncertainty. But, as these earlier slides have also shown, building new infrastructure to support that increased demand, even if we wanted to do it, is going to be challenging and it's going to be costly. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about sort of how does the electricity sector traditionally respond to these types of increases and why we should be cautious about using these traditional mechanisms. So we've got three types of electric utilities. We've got investor-owned utilities, that's in the yellow on the right. We have rural electric cooperatives, and we also have what are either called public power utilities or publicly owned utilities. And so these are basically government utilities. And all three of these types exist in Texas. We have far fewer in number investor-owned utilities. These are our private utilities that are regulated by government regulators, federal and state. There's only 168 of those, but they serve about 67% of the electricity customers in the US. Got a decent number of cooperatives. They serve about 13%. And we've got lots and lots of small municipal utilities, some large municipal utilities. Austin, Texas, as many of you know, is a municipal utility. Sacramento, Los Angeles, but also lots of little towns scattered over the US. They also serve about 14% of electricity customers total. So, I'm going to focus a lot on the investor-owned utilities right now because they're the ones who are really responding to these projected increases in demand. And so this shows the investor-owned utilities all over the country. You'll see the ones in Texas, and this is not showing the municipal utilities, and it is not showing the rural electric cooperatives. So that's why you see a state like Nebraska that famously kicked out all the private investor-owned utilities in the 1930s, part of the kind of populist agenda there. So everybody in Nebraska is served by either rural electric cooperatives or public power. But in Texas, you have all of the above, as is true in a lot of different states. Okay, so it's the investor-owned utilities that are really subject to both federal and state regulation. So at the federal side, regulated through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This is they regulate the sale of wholesale electricity in interstate commerce, transmission of electricity in interstate commerce, and then permitting and siting of both transmission lines and energy generation facilities only if they're on federal land or in federal waters, like in the Gulf of Mexico or in the outer continental shelf off the East Coast or the West Coast. Otherwise, siting and permitting of transmission lines and energy generation facilities is done at the state level. And then also the sale of electricity at retail, so sales to end users, that is also subject to state government regulation and not federal government regulation. And there's very little, if any, federal or state regulation of either municipal utilities or rural electric cooperatives with regard at least to electricity rates. That can differ a little bit state by state. So you kind of get a sense of the regulatory picture here. So the electric utilities, again, when I'm talking here about the private investor-owned utilities, in most of the country, they have a monopoly service territory. This is true in terms of the transmission lines and the distribution system. It's not always true with regard to power plants, generation plants. That really varies by state. So as you may know, Texas has a restructured approach. There's a lot less regulation and a lot more competition. But with regard to the utilities that are providing transmission service and distribution service, that still is a monopoly service territory. And municipal utilities and rural electric cooperatives, even in Texas, have monopoly service territories. But utilities in almost every state, as a matter of state law, have what's called a duty to serve their customers. If a new customer comes in, the utility has to figure out a way to serve them with electricity. Maybe not immediately if they don't have enough available, but eventually. And they have to provide them reliable service on a non-discriminatory basis. So that means that utilities have to plan for the future and either build or buy enough electricity supplies and enough transmission capacity to provide that reliable service. That's their obligation. That's what they get in exchange for having that monopoly service territory. So that means if they don't have enough power available, utilities can delay a major user's interconnection to the system until they can provide that 24/7 reliable service. So for those of you who don't follow this every day, you may have at least read in the newspaper about, data centers being told they might have to wait 4 years or 5 years to connect to a system if they want to go in a particular location. That is a result of this. The utility prices are regulated by the public utility commissions, which are state agencies, because it's a retail sale from the utility to the data center or to any residential customers. That's a retail sale. That's going to be regulated at the state level. And the utility prices are set in order to allow them to cover their costs of service, but also make a profit, earn a rate of return on their invested capital for new transmission lines, for new power plants. So there's a lot of risks associated with this traditional model with a big increase in projected electricity demand. So the utilities could say, hey, this is a great opportunity to build a lot of new infrastructure. We get a rate of return, let's say 12%, 13%. By building this new infrastructure, we can make a lot of money for our investors. So they could overbuild their plants. There's also risk that they build or revive fossil fuel power plants, which is not good for localized air pollution or for climate. So we're worried about building excess capacity. And if it's excess capacity, consumers are going to have to pay for this. And this has happened many times. Georgia Power built a new nuclear plant that they opened a few years ago. And billions of dollars of cost overruns, and the customers of Georgia Power are going to have to pay for that. And that means lots of increase in electricity rates. And this is happening at a time when retail rates are increasing all over the country. You see a lot of that in the newspaper. It's not always increasing at the same rate, but certainly you see in the Pacific region lots of increases. I think Texas is a little more modest. This is just from March 2025, what the average kilowatt hour rates are by state. You see very high rates in places like Alaska, Hawaii, in California, all for different reasons. Some high rates in the Northeast, and then more modest rates in the rest of the country. And this just shows sort of how residential electricity rates have really increased in terms of as compared with other types of costs that consumers pay. If you compare with like natural gas rates, now of course this was before everything going on in Iran, so this is a little bit out of date. But if you look at, again, but until then, cost of gasoline, cost of heating oil, residential electricity rates had stayed quite low and then have been increasing. So that's an issue as well. Lots of complicated reasons why this is happening. This is not all because of data centers. A lot of it is the need to invest in older, aging infrastructure on the distribution side and the transmission side. But the story is really different in each region. But the end result is increasing electricity prices. So, utilities, public utility commissions, and legislatures are starting to respond. Some are doing this by contract, by tariffs, in terms of saying what data centers are going to need to pay. Texas passed legislation saying that data centers could potentially connect to the grid without secure electricity, and utilities could cut them off. This is potentially a good solution to this and is fairly innovative, but a lot of states are just kind of trying to figure out what to do. So here's where we get to sort of lessons from other resources. I'm going to go really quickly through natural gas. So the natural gas system, you've got sort of the production side, you've got the pipeline side, and you've got the distribution side of the natural gas industry, and you've got some FERC regulation, federal regulation of wholesale prices, and then you've got state public utility commissions are regulating prices to retail customers. So it's set up actually similar to the electricity system. But one thing that has always been a part of the natural gas regulatory landscape that really hasn't been so much on the electricity side is interruptible natural gas contracts. So basically the buyer pays a lower rate, and if there's not enough gas available, the seller can cut the buyer off in times of shortages. So you pay less, but you don't necessarily have secure service. And that used to work fine until the 1970s because like we generally had enough natural gas. Then during the energy crisis, all of a sudden we didn't have enough natural gas. Um, and so initially, these interruptible contracts provided a pretty good mechanism. So in times of shortage, those folks would get cut off first, but they got what they paid for. But then there were so many curtailments and so much shortage that regulators had to go beyond interruptible contracts and start cutting off firm contract holders as well. There was a lot of litigation. This was done contract by contract. And basically, Congress decided to sort of change around the natural gas system in very complicated ways that we talk about in the paper, but beyond what we need to talk about during this presentation, but basically created what we still have now is a capacity release program that basically you still have interruptible contract holders and they can enter into third-party contracts when they need gas and want to pay more for it from other firm contract holders. So basically, we have an interruptible system, but a secondary market where people can get gas if they need to. So again, we have interruptible contracts, we have this capacity reserve market, and the system functions pretty well. And so the idea is that shortages are allocated through contractual mechanisms rather than government intervention, which is what had happened in the past. Okay, so I'm now going to move to Western water, which I think is, kind of the most interesting example here. So, as I said, electricity has always been pretty plentiful. If we needed more electricity in a region of the country or in the US as a whole, we just built more. In the West, that has never been true of water. We have never had enough water in the West. And so this just shows the average annual precipitation across the country. Lots of water here, not so much water here. And so this is basically the dividing line of the two water systems that we have in the US. Where here in the areas that are green, it's kind of share and share alike. This is called a riparian system. If you have property near water, you can reasonably use that water. And in the West, we have what's called a prior appropriation system. And Texas, of course, has, since it straddles kind of all of these regions, they have different systems in different parts of the country. This is just showing drought in the West, no drought in the East, at least for the year that's showing that we show on this map. Monthly precipitation changes significantly. This is just looking at California. And so we needed to set up a system that dealt with shortages all the time, not just occasionally. So the basic rules for the Western approach to water law is called prior appropriation, which basically you don't have water rights based on the fact that you have property near water. You have water rights based on priority. When you have first diverted water for what's called a beneficial use, the government says, yes, you have a water right. This is the amount of your water right. And newcomers can come to the system, but when there's not enough water, they're going to get shut off. So the junior water rights, the senior water rights are going to get all their water first before the junior water rights holders get anything. But like in the natural gas context, the junior water rights holders, they can use private water markets and other innovations to basically hedge against this risk of curtailment. So this is showing the city of Los Angeles. City of Los Angeles has always had junior water rights. So they always have precarious water rights. What have they done? They've actually come up with really good water efficiency innovations in terms of water recycling. They have a big plant expansion that's going on. And so it's really spurred a huge amount of innovation in Southern California. By contrast, Northern California has more senior water rights, and they've not been as innovative with regard to water. People always think California is going to run out of water, and so far they haven't. Prior appropriation is criticized a lot. It is not perfect, but it hasn't destroyed the economies in the West yet. So what can we learn for that with regard to electricity systems? Is there anything we can learn from the natural gas regime or from the Western water rights to deal with our current problems with regard to electricity system? So Dave and I came up with a term that we think is kind of clunky, but is descriptive, called demand side connect and manage. we basically are borrowing from Texas's ERCOT's system of how they connect new generation plants. It's called connect and manage. Basically, if a new wind or a new solar plant or a new gas plant wants to connect to the system to provide electricity, in Texas, you can connect pretty quickly. But if there's too much generation on the system, those newcomers are going to get cut off first. So we're flipping this to the demand side, to the data center side. So basically, the idea would be new large loads, new data centers. You can connect to the grid, um, but there's no guarantee that supplies and transmission systems are going to be able to meet your demand at all times. So state regulated utilities could curtail those new users. And then we would have secondary markets to allow these large loads to use trading to kind of hedge.
You're mute.
Uh-oh. Okay. Since when? Here?
Sorry, I believe it just was a few seconds, like,
Okay. So did you hear what was on this slide or not?
yes.
You did. Okay, good. Okay, so why do we think this demand side connect and manage is a good idea? Again, we think data centers could connect faster. There'd be less need for constructing new infrastructure because we don't, now a utility would not need to meet 24/7 demand of this projected new load. So we have less potential for costly overbuilding. And we also think there's some good incentives that could be placed on new hyperscalers. These are some of the most innovative, well-financed companies in the world. They're in a very good position to innovate and to increase their ability to be flexible with regard to their electricity demand and deal with and sort of create these sorts of third-party markets. Our paper doesn't answer all the questions that would be raised by this system. So what about interconnection fees, someone might ask? Should these new large loads pay something to compensate other consumers for increased costs? There are a lot of both tariffs and regulatory systems that are doing just that with regard to interconnection fees. Also, how are we going to decide on curtailment? Is it first come, first served? Is it something else? We don't think that doing it based on whether the data center serves a hospital versus crypto mining versus other different types of uses is a very good way to do that. But obviously, each state could decide for itself. And there's also a question about who should establish this system. Should it be FERC at the federal level? Should states do it? That is a debate that's going on right now as FERC is deciding about whether it wants to sort of jump in and create a federal system for addressing new demand or leave it to the states. We think states can for sure do this. There's some question about federal jurisdiction over this that's going to play out, but either way, states can definitely do this. Can it work? Is this a good idea? We think that the curtailment needs may be a lot more modest than people think. And for this, we base it on what's been a really influential report by researchers at the Duke Nicholas Institute that says we really have a lot of extra what's called headroom in the system. There's a lot of electricity that is available and is not being used because we build for sort of the hottest days, the highest demand days, and most of the time we're not using that. And so as a result, there would be these researchers determined that there would be very few times of the year and even times of day where you would actually need to have curtailment. And also on the electricity side, we have a lot, it's a very data rich field. We have demand response. We have a lot of potential for secondary markets and the ability for people and businesses to reduce their demand, to aggregate that reduced demand more so than we have in the water side, where actually we don't have as good information about water systems. So we think this can work and it's a good approach. Could it fail? Yes, absolutely, it could fail. There's lots of opportunity for political capture. There's lots of opportunity for large companies to take advantage of either federal regulators, state regulators, and utilities. So we recognize the risks here, but we think it's at least a way to think about moving forward to create systems for this new world that we find ourselves in. So just end with a few resources. I have another citation to the article. There also, if you do not want to read a 60-page law review article, which many people do not want to do, and that would be understandable, there's a piece in Inside Climate News where the reporter interviewed us, and I thought it provided a really nice summary of our proposal. And then Dave and I also did an op-ed in Utility Dive last November, kind of setting that out as well. So I think at this point, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. And we've got, looks like a few minutes for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I got a few questions, and the first question is asking how you handle or how we can handle the transition from existing legacy contract that you have it to the model that you or the proposal you propose, because uh, already some data centers have like a contract with uh, different parties. So what your insight is for this transition, like managing two sides, like the new model or new contract and the existing one that we have it.
So a lot of this is being done through individual tariffs between data centers or hyperscalers and the electric utility that's going to be serving them. And one of the things that we do in the paper is talk about some of the early tariffs that had come out. So there's one in Nevada where Google worked out a tariff with Nevada Energy that Google would pay for a big new geothermal plant that would run through Nevada Energy. So the Nevada Energy would provide that power for Google. In Nevada, it's a traditionally regulated state, so basically Google couldn't do it directly, but they worked with the utility to come up with a tariff that Google would make the investment in the new geothermal resources to provide them with that power, but obviously that's helpful for the system as a whole. So that's one example. A lot of these individual, and all of these tariffs have to get approved by the State Public Utility Commission. So that is one way to do it, is by tariff, but obviously that's not a comprehensive way to do it. You have all of these bespoke tariffs, although once you have one or two that are good, others can learn from that. But you can also do it as a legislative matter, like Texas has done. Texas has the legislature, passed a law saying, "Hey, utilities, you can, arrange with data centers to basically curtail them when needed." And so I actually think that is quite helpful. Now, you also want, I think, regulation as to what data centers can build. If they're not going to be able to rely on the grid, if they're going to build a lot of behind the meter power, presumably many residents in the area would rather that be renewable electricity rather than new fossil fuel power plants that are going to cause a lot of pollution and provide a lot of noise, right? States can regulate that as well. So there are ways for the state legislature to be engaged. There are also ways for state public utility commissions to kind of set the rules for this, and they can do that through their existing authority to set just and reasonable and non-discriminatory rates. So there's a bunch of different ways that this can go about. Or we might have a federal system. I think that's kind of a long way off. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot of room for state regulation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I shared the CLE credit with you, and I believe Professor Hester has a question, and we have another one in the chat box.
All right, wonderful presentation, Alex. Thank you so much. And I think you may have partially already answered my question, which may make this easy. But as you know, in Texas, the legislatures tried to intervene with the projected power demands of the data centers by passing SB 6, which has shifted a lot of the obligations for interconnection, for study, for load preparation, for curtailment events onto the data center operators. To the point where they're looking at even just the application fee to the PUC as a six-figure bill. So we're hearing that a lot of the data centers are basically looking to go off grid. Uh, some of the biggest projects are being done with natural gas turbines behind the meter. And effectively, they are going to try and create their own 4 to 5 9 reliability and just forego ERCOT. And I was just curious if your and Dave's proposal sort of contemplates a possible balkanization effect and sort of having a parallel private.
Oh, I think you froze. I caught most of your question.
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay,
believe you
but
may
it
have
was a good
something.
question. That is a concern.
Uh-oh.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. So, for instance, in Minnesota, there we've got pretty strict, here we have pretty strict decarbonization mandates, and Minnesota passed a law that says, not only can the utilities not move away from their decarbonization mandates to meet data centers, the demand of data centers, there's also, any behind the meter power is going to be reviewed pretty strictly by either the State Public Utility Commission or the air regulators in Minnesota. Probably not true in Texas, right? In Texas, you can do a lot more building what you want. And so there, the market's really going to drive that. And so I'm going to be interested to see, is it going to be all natural gas? Is it going to be wind, solar, batteries? How is that going to work? And if you do have a balkanized system that's taken out of kind of utility regulation, there could be opportunity for innovation, but there also could be opportunity for bad things to happen as well. And that is a risk. It absolutely is a risk. I think that's a risk whether you use whether you sort of advocate for the proposal we have in the paper or otherwise. I think it's sort of the train has already left the station. It's really interesting to see how things have developed even since we've written this paper. So for instance, when we first started writing this paper, the whole idea of demand flexibility or curtailment, every hyperscaler, every data center said, no, we need 24/7. We don't do demand response. The sort of mantra was no, no, and no. And that has completely changed. And you have many of those same companies agreeing to certain levels of curtailment in tariffs and coming up with sort of innovations to do this. So I think that's been a good development. But I share your concern about a lot of behind the meter, unregulated behind the meter, particularly, diesel generators, new natural gas plants, and what that means.
At some point, if we can have a virtual cup of coffee, I'll just say one interesting early effect is we're seeing a lot of the planning obligations and loads that the PUC would have carried are shifting over to TCEQ and air permitting, which is an interesting misalignment, but it's where we're headed. And with that, I'll be quiet. I know we have other questions.
But I would like to talk with you more offline about sort of what's happening in Texas now.
Anytime. It's summer. I have nothing else to do.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tracy. And we have another question from the chat box and asking, should state utility commissioners create a um, standardized interconnection agreement that large load must use?
I think I don't know if some are doing that. Uh, Other people on the call might know. I mean, I think it's to some extent it's at the state level. A lot of it is at the RTO level when you have the regional RTOs. And I know that they, are trying to do that in PJM and in MISO. And it's also in terms of the sort of bulk interconnection system, that's what FERC is really focusing on too. So, the DOE has proposed that FERC come up with a standardized system. And a lot of states are very unhappy with that because the states are like, we're in charge of this. You're moving into our territory with retail customers. And that's that jurisdictional debate that I mentioned before that is playing out right now. It's not clear what FERC is going to do, but there are already at the RTO level different types of interconnection agreements that the system for interconnection in general, both for new generation and then now for new demand, has been having problems for a while, less so in Texas because Texas has been pretty innovative with regard to these things. But PJM, it's been a big problem, and this is really showing the problems of the system. And I'll be interested to see, does the reform come from the states? Does the reform come from FERC, or what combination of those two? So I think that's an ongoing debate and conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I believe like we are run of time. And thank you so much for all the participants who joined our webinar. Uh, and thank you so much, Professor Klass, for joining us and sharing your insight with us. It's just truly very wonderful presentation and to know about all these proposals. And the last thing that unfortunately the Professor Owen couldn't attend. Usually, like we organize it to have both of you on the webinar, but unfortunately he couldn't. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much for joining us. And please follow us, follow the INA website for our July webinar, which will be announced soon. So thank you so much for all, and hope you have a wonderful summer break.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.